Welcome to the Human Advantage podcast, where culture is created, not claimed. We've been talking about culture for years, but most companies still reduce people to check boxes that are supposed to define an entire human being. We hire for familiarity, we reward sameness, and then wonder why teams struggle. The problem isn't talent, it's the system. And this podcast is about changing that. Diversity beyond checkboxes, culture add over culture fit, and how people think is the real differentiator. Because people aren't categories, they're the advantage.
Yep. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Human Advantage podcast. I'm Adam Kleckner. I got my co-host Tia Kleckner with me today, and we got a real exciting guest, Conway Brew, who is a healthcare executive, enterprise transformation leader, and neurodiversity advocate. After receiving an autism diagnosis later in life, Conway has used his platform to speak openly about masking, disclosure, psychological safety, and the workplace systems that can either support neurodivergent people or quietly push them out. His perspective, I think, is really powerful for this podcast because it's not only lived experience, but also senior leadership experience that he brings to the conversation. So welcome, buddy.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
We're excited to have you. So I think when we first connected, I told you, man, you popped up in my LinkedIn feed and all I saw was the neurodiversity advocate. And I was like, my people, I like it. I liked it. I was like, all right. So we synced. We were just joking with T. I think we had booked a 12-minute meeting and it ended up being an hour. So
yeah, it was a quick introduction. We called it.
Yeah. For us, it's quick. Right. But I'm curious, man, like what brought you to put that out in the world? What was the driver to kind of put the neurodiversity advocate on your profile and speak more openly about it?
It was actually a conversation with my therapist after reading comments by our current Health and Human Services Secretary that people who are neurodivergent would never pay taxes and would never hold an executive level job. And I was talking to my therapist, like I obviously disagree because I know a lot of people like that. And two, what, if anything, can I do about that? And she goes, well, do you have a following anywhere? I said, well, surprisingly, I have a lot of people follow me on LinkedIn for reasons I don't fully understand, but cool.
I feel the same way.
Yeah. So she's like, well, could you use that? I'm like, sure. So that's what led me to it. I was like, well, that's not true. And I know that to be untrue. But not everyone, especially those starting out in their career, know that to be untrue.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was where I started.
Now I want to go back to what Adam said in the beginning. You've talked about masking for decades, and here we are talking about being successful while doing it. What do people misunderstand about high-functioning masking in the workplace?
So much.
Yeah.
That's the
open question.
Yeah. So I think, honestly, a lot of it has to do with the misunderstanding of autism in general. And it really has to do with, set aside the DSM for a minute, where there's 3 distinct levels of autism requiring different levels of support. That's kind of sort of accurate, I guess, sure. Those are pretty big buckets to put a lot of people into. But I think the prevailing thing that makes it hard to explain to folks is there's this inherent belief that autism is a linear spectrum. And it is not. As I refer to it, it's more like a studio mixing board. Some people have their dials set to 11 on this thing. Other people have them set to 0 on that same thing. And so, as my therapist says, if you've met one autistic, you've met one autistic. So it's hard for me to say specifically what that would be like for everybody. For me personally, it really just meant hiding a lot of, as my wife would say, my nerdy nature, my special interest. My office has been redecorated recently. To that extent, there used to be large displays of Mandalorian helmets behind my desk.
Love it.
So it was just kind of tucking that stuff away and realizing that not everyone wants to know that kind of stuff. Not everyone wants to connect to that part of a work colleague. So otherwise, as a high functioning autistic, and thank you for saying that. It was really. It's the stress that comes with it. Like, what am I not supposed to say? Especially as your career your career gets bigger and you interact with more people, and there's social events and there's drinks and there's meeting with external stakeholders, and how do you not commit to oversharing?
Yeah.
In those settings, which is pretty common for most neurodivergent people. Is like, I'm trying to connect, so to do that, I'm going to share a bunch of stuff you probably don't want to know. And so you actually kind of, or at least in my case, you become kind of known as the quiet person who thinks a lot before they speak. And it wasn't, that's great that people gave me the benefit of the doubt. I wasn't really thinking. I was really thinking about, well, what do I not say? And so that's kind of how it worked for me. It was exhausting to go to a lot of these, I guess you call them extracurricular work functions.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, the stigmas around that too, right? Because with my ADHD, like, you meet me at the event and you think, I'm super social and talkative, and people hear me on this and I talk too much. But what people don't see is the the drive to the networking event. I'm stressed the whole time. I don't want to talk to anybody. Anxiety's through the roof. Then I get there and I can put on the mask, and then Tia will know this. After leaving one, I'm like, nobody talk to me for an hour. Like, my battery's done. I'm drained. I don't want to talk to anyone. But like, people just associate ADHD with hyperactivity and super talkative. I'm like, kinda, not really. Like, I'm pretty good, just feel by myself a lot. Like, it's actually not always the case.
You're actually
right?
opposite.
It's interesting. So one of my teammates outside of work, not a work teammate, but a sports teammate, who's a physician leader at a local hospital system, approached me, one, to thank me for the work I'm doing, and two, to ask me, when you get a diagnosis late in life, what changes? I said, honestly, the only thing that changes is that I now have the language to explain what I'm going through that I didn't have before. Otherwise, nothing changes.
For sure. But let's touch on that, though, because you kind of brought this up in our first meeting, and it was something powerful that kind of stuck with me, that people downstream in their careers may not have that same safety or tenure to speak openly about this. And so talk a little bit about that, maybe why that was, why did that matter to you to put this out there and be more open as a leader? Because again, we joke on this podcast all the time, and I say this, in multiple settings, that Silicon Valley was born out of neurodivergence, right? Like every tech leader they're like, they were successful because they thought differently, but broadly, I don't think you see quite as many leaders, a little bit more nowadays, but definitely not 5-10 years ago, as open about talking about this, right? It was not as many setting the example for the people who are maybe younger in their careers to speak out and advance, what they need. And so I think just touch on that a little bit, man, because that was something that stuck with me out of our first convo.
Sure. So part of that goes back to earlier in my career, I worked in the behavioral health space. And it formed a lot of my understanding of human beings, from not just from neurodivergence, just for how brains function and don't appropriately work, and really set kind of the direction where, my view now of mental health challenges is really, to use a very simplistic term, it's just brain miswiring. Your wiring from the factory came differently. And there's no shame, and there shouldn't be any stigma attached to that. Society will tell you that's not the case. It's getting better. Not going to lie. It's a lot better than when I was in behavioral health. But there's still enough of it, and now that we better understand autism and ADHD, and until recently we didn't even think those two things could be together. Like, there was no, if you had one, you couldn't have the other. Well, that's also not right? So now we know there's this whole group of people that, I think the term is ADHD, which is difficult to say, but So part of what I'm trying to say is, as you look at that, I'm like, well, there's still a lot of destigmatization work to happen. And so where I was going with trying to do this for people who are earlier in their careers, that has to be modeled. They're not going to reach that organically, no matter how much therapeutic support they may or may not have, or family support they may or may not have. If no one upstream from them models that's okay, and that you can make work for you, it's not going to happen. They're going to go home stressed every night. They're going to be, constantly massing. They're going to burn out. They're going to fracture earlier in their career. And some of these people are really talented people.
For sure.
And, we don't want to lose really talented people in any industry.
Right.
So part of it was just the recognition as a people leader. It's incumbent upon me to protect future talent as well.
Yeah, I love that, man. It's so important, and it's funny with the labels. So I've been labeled so long I can laugh about it these days. But like, when I was diagnosed, ADHD was you were the Jack Russell Terrier running circles in the room, you burned a hole in the carpet. And like our head of recruiting's dyslexic, and he'll joke like, yeah, dude, not every person who's dyslexic mixes up words when they read.
Right.
He's like, it's a different like,
Right.
But there's these like each one of these categories has these stigmas attached to it. We had a guy on last week who we just released the pod, and he was like, yeah, not like the danger and the superpower with autism is not every autistic person's like, hey, go solve this math problem for me, right? It's not this savant level, like, yeah, right? Like, but we automatically think that. And so I think just even being open to just talk about it is so important for younger people to hear, like, they don't get pigeonholed into those categories. So I love that work that you're doing on that side.
Yeah,
Right. And not just younger people to hear, just the general population, really. Because that's what's going to help with these stigmas.
Yeah, that's also fair. That's a fair assessment also. So part of what, and when Adam found me, part of what I've been working on with the help of my therapist is what can I put out in the world that doesn't require corporate level change to make teams more neuro-inclusive. Like, I'm not asking you to change your whole corporation. What can you as a people leader, a downstream people leader, maybe you have a team of 3, maybe a team of 4, maybe you're just learning what it is to be a people leader. What can you do to create that psychological safety for the neurodivergent people on your team? And these are little things that anyone can do within your control as a people leader.
That's a great pivot. What are some of the things that they can do?
Oh my God,
and especially without, okay, name a few. Well, we got a time limit here.
Right.
How can they do this and support these individuals without requiring that self-disclosure?
Part of it is, the thing I focus on a lot is actually language change. A lot of the corporate language structure is built around a neurotypical environment, which isn't bad, right? Because we're a creature of averages, right? The humans just we like to work to the mean. But so what I really started focusing on initially was actually just like the words you use in talent review. What is executive presence? These things. These are judgments. These aren't real measurable things. And so I started talking to people leaders about, could you really start to build your metrics for your personnel around what are actual measurable things?
Yeah.
Did they solve the problem? There's something you can point to there. Executive presence is if you ask 5 executives to name and explain executive presence, you're probably going to get 4 different answers, maybe 5.
Yeah.
It's about, what do you think executive presence is? And I started to realize that a lot of the language you use, both in talking to employees and talking about employees, is all based on these things that are very, very subjective. And that doesn't work well for neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
So part of doing this, whether they want to mask, whether they don't want to mask, whether they feel comfortable telling you, is if you just start using language that's more inclusive, you make people more comfortable, and you actually help solidify their forward trajectory, because now they're not being called out for things that they're not going to subjectively live up to. I mean, I don't know many neurodivergent people who would fit the common corporate understanding of executive presence.
Yeah.
But they're really good at what they do. And so,
for sure.
So that's the kind of catch-all I worked from is, how do we reframe to start with the language? And then since doing reviews is within your control, how do you promote that? So you've now changed your language, and this is what you've written in your review. How do you continue to fight for this is how reviews should be done?
Right.
Can we make things these more measurable? And they're small changes, and that's the corporate world, though. You're going to move from one team to another team, and you might not get the same accommodation on another team.
No, it's super important. It is funny you mentioned that these systems are built towards the mean, but there's a lot of data coming out now that I saw one recently that was, I think it was 56% of Gen Z and millennials associate with some form of neurodivergence. I think it's even higher in Gen Alpha. So it's like, it's kind of time to start catching up to the mean. Maybe
Agreed. I guess the better to find the mean
not anymore.
Business terminology mean, right?
For sure. Yeah. No, I get you, but I do joke because I think people think it's such a small minority, right? And then you realize, like, even the global population, I think this number's low these days, but it's 1 in 5 in the global population neurodivergent. I always use the example of, if you go walk through the grocery store, 1 in 5 people you see are neurodivergent. You just have no clue who it is. That's the thing, right?
Right.
We're becoming less and less of the odd ones out, I'll say.
Agreed. And I think the numbers will continue to grow as we refine identification criteria, especially among women. We culturally, not culturally, we medically, we do so many wrong things for women medically. But that aside, we're really bad at diagnosing neurodivergence in women. We tend to focus, the go-to is anxiety. Oh, you have anxiety.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you really? Is it really anxiety, or is there something that causes it? Are you really digging into that? No, because they're a woman. Don't get me in that soapbox.
I hear you, man. I mean, my mom, I didn't find out this till a few months ago. It was funny because we were talking about the podcast and, about my ADHD. And she goes, well, I was diagnosed when I was like 40, right? And I was like, no, but it makes sense. No idea. But, but it was, but for her to be diagnosed at 40, 25 years ago, that was a kind of groundbreaking diagnosis then, because even that, 20 years ago, women weren't diagnosed nearly to where they are today. So it is shifting, but it is still much less. But I want to kind of click back a little bit, because this is something that you touched on, and I think we kind of brushed over it, but I think it's a really important thing that doesn't get talked about enough, which is kind of the performance review side of things, right? And I want to touch on this for a couple of reasons, because I went through this personally. I was in a role a couple of years ago where, a large part of my salary was a bonus structure, right? Like it was a big piece of it. And I remember getting my annual review. It was a German CEO, so it was always interesting communication pieces, right? And he'd sit me down, he looked at me, and he's like, you didn't, according to what your kind of, your SOW, what you were supposed to do, you didn't really do like 90% of it. I'm going, shit, I'm not going to get my bonus. Here we go. Like, all right, he goes, but you did grow the company by about, 22 million. So I guess we'll give you the bonus. What's written in your bullet points does not usually dictate how it's done with neurodivergent people, but you've got to look at the end results. And I think when we had talked and you touched on even a few minutes ago about the performance review side of things, what that looks like as a leader for a neurodivergent person can be very different than a neurotypical person, because it's not always that linear progression of, you did A, so you get B. Sometimes it's you did Z, which somehow led to A, which led to Z, back to Z, but the end result was, a net positive for the company. So I like to touch on that a little bit, on how you do the performance review side, because I don't. It impacts so many neurodivergent people, but I don't hear leaders talk about it enough.
Yeah. So to be fair, as a neurodivergent person, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out who I am as a leader, right?
Right.
In part because I want, as in my role, I end up absorbing teams. I refer to my current job as the island of misfit toys. So maybe a certain age, I get it. Some of my people who work for me don't get it. So I'm like, okay. I'm trying to find a picture of Hermie the elf, and they're like, they still don't get it. So I'm like, wow, I'm old. So part of what I do, there's like, I make it very clear. I can sum up my leadership philosophy now in a quick trite sentence, which is I like to hire adults, treat them like adults, and expect adult level work in return. Which means I expect you to manage yourself. I'm going to give you a set of goals. How you reach the goals is going to look different for everyone, and I don't care.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate enough to work for a boss who's even a more kind of structured version of me. A lot of what we do on my current team involves thinking. Yeah. I don't know what thinking looks like for different people. I don't know if you're doom scrolling. I don't know if you're walking around the park, and I don't care. Are you hitting the deliverable at the end, and is the deliverable good quality work? That's what I care about. Yeah. And it takes people a while to get their head wrapped around that. Like, oh, you really just. Like, they'll write me and say, like, I have an appointment. I'm like, okay. And?
Cool.
I'm like, okay. Are you an adult? Fine. Go deal with that.
Yeah.
And so I try to tell them, part of getting to your deliverables is you know best when you can take time off. Don't ask me for time off. Just tell me when you're doing it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can take the time off because you're managing your deliverable. I'm here to help, and to clear roadblocks. So if there's a roadblock in your deliverable, let me know. If you need help understanding, the changing parameters of the deliverable, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to support you. I'm not here to tell you how to do your work.
And I think your neurodivergence, man, in that kind of black and white style thinking in a way, right? Like that, like, okay, I don't care. Is the job getting done or not? Allows you to lead better in many senses, because with a lot of other leaders that we deal with, we deal with different leaders every day in our business. There's a level of control that they need, right? And I think that's where it comes down to, hey, tell me what you're doing. I worked with one man. I worked with another firm 2 years ago, or my second agency role, and I remember we had a snow day once, and they said it was before remote work, and everybody worked from home, and the CEO goes, okay, I need you guys to email me every 30 minutes and tell me what you're doing. It's a good exercise to understand how you process through a day. And I'm like, that's not what it is. It's a control thing that you want to make sure we're working.
Micromanaging from home.
Yeah, that you don't work from home. And I was just like, oh man, I'm out. I quit pretty quick after. But but I do think, your ability to just be like, I don't care, just get the job done, is one that a lot of leaders struggle with.
It is. Yeah. And I think, looking back, a lot of that comes from, kind of the old world manufacturing background. Like, I need to make sure you're making my widgets.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, the first time I took that tack, I had to learn a lot, right? Like my part where neurodivergence shows up a lot is in interpersonal relationships. I fortunately have a spouse who's very supportive and spent years working in fields that have helped me be better in social settings. Right. Whereas I tell people, I basically created this giant IVR tree that I think through every time something comes up. And my example I use how bad I was when I first started, before I got to where I am, is I had this guy call, say, I don't know if I can come into work today. My cat's very ill and might die. And my brain, because it's black and white, immediately flips to, well, that's a binary decision. You're coming in or you're not. I just need to know. Are you coming in or not? My wife's like, no, you're supposed to ask how the cat is. I'm like, okay. So I've softened the edges of the, that black and white to say, okay, it is black and white for me. Are you getting the job done? But, how's the cat? Or like, how's the, what?
Yeah.
What she taught me that was very helpful is the things that people repeat in their one-on-ones are the things that are most important to them. Ask about those things when you meet with them.
Yeah.
With your kid's baseball team, is it, so that made me better at the person side of it. Which made them more comfortable with that black and white. Oh, I can be self-directed. I can be an adult. Because what I learned is you can tell people that, and they're very suspicious in the corporate world. Yeah. They're like, oh, yeah. Are you not checking up on me? I'm like, no, because I really don't care how you do it. I don't care if you're sitting at Starbucks. I don't care. I don't want to get done well.
But, what's the catch? What's the catch?
That's exactly where they're coming from. I'm like, that's really sad. And so I changed it to I just like to hire adults and treat them like adults. I don't like to infantilize your work. You're an adult. Yeah. Make adult level decisions. Thank you very much. And please don't bring me all this, like, can I have time off stuff? Very tedious.
That's it's also fascinating. We've talked about the performance review and once they get post-hire, but let's kind of take it back to the beginning. Yeah. How can we support these individuals in the interview process? And, I'm asking you the big questions, really open, broad questions.
So I may not be the best person to ask that question. I've thrown most of everything I've ever learned about interviewing in the corporate world out the window.
That's great.
So for two reasons. One,
that's a good thing.
One, I truly believe that we call them skills because skills can be learned. You either told me the truth on your resume or not, and I don't care. We'll figure it out. But if you blow up the current environment of my team, you're not the right person. I spend a lot of my time interviewing, really just trying to get to know someone and about their personality. As much as they'll let go in an interview, right? They're a little guarded. Everyone is. It's human nature. But I really want to see, are you going to come in and make my team not function? Because that won't work for me. If you're dishonest about a skill, your skill's not up to par, we'll work on that. I can train that. If you're the right person for the team, that's more important to me. And I learned that originally from an interview Richard Branson did about interviewing. He interviews for personality, not skill. And that was furthered, in my brief and limited interactions with the U.S. Armed Forces. That's actually how most SEAL team members are picked. It's not the best warfighter if they're the worst person for the team. It could be the mediocre warfighter who's the best team fit. Because my team has to function as a holistic entity, or my teams individually, I guess these days. And so when I interview people, it's not about the traditional, hey, you did this for X number of years. Tell me about a time when you had to have a hard conversation.
Every neurodivergent nightmare right there.
Well, the one thing that I really hate, and I learned from my daughter that people are going back to it is and we should get away from neurodivergence, is panel interviews. Why don't you come and talk to these 5 people all at once? Like, oh my God, no.
The rapid fire questions.
Yeah, I don't even want to see all 5 of you at the same time. No, thank you.
So,
when I can use my influence, I'm also like, we should not do that to anyone, not just neurodivergent people, but to anyone. Like, you shouldn't put them in the hot seat in front of a bunch of people. This isn't Shark Tank. They're not going to get $1 million for coming to this interview. So make life a little easier.
There's something that's interesting. My brain always looks at kind of big picture and strategy and all of this. And so here's the correlation I'm drawing, right? You bring up the cat example that you had earlier, where you're like, oh, I'm supposed to ask about the cat. But listening to you talk here, it's very clear that you do care a lot about your team, and you care about that dynamic, and you care about their success, and you care about them as people. But because of the way you answer that question about the cat, some people may look at you and be like, well, he doesn't care. He just doesn't care. He doesn't care about me. He doesn't care about who this is. But it's like, no, that's not the association. The association is your brain goes to, how do I solve the problem? Are you coming in? What do I do to fix it? How do I do this?
Right.
That does not mean you don't care about the person or your team or what's going on. Your brain just went to solution mode, right? And I think sometimes people hear that with autistic people and they're like, oh, well, they're just assholes, or they just don't understand me, or they don't care, right? Which is, again, another generalization, but it's very clear listening to you speak about your team and the culture you've created within there. And I know we spent an hour on this about, how you build teams and what we do in our first chat, that you do care. You care a lot about your people and making them successful and teaching them skills and training them, but you want the right people at its core. And so I think sometimes that disconnect with, oh, you're autistic, you don't care. Well, that's not it, right? And I think that that's a stereotype we need to break.
I agree. Yeah. You're right. And thank you for seeing that. I do care. I don't always express it appropriately, as my spouse has taught me to say. I don't always express that appropriately. And I think that's true of a lot of people with various forms of neurodivergence. They actually care very deeply, don't know how to express that. And also because of all the masking, unsure if work is the right place to express that.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I was always one of the people, like, I worked with nurses for a long time and they like to hug. I'm like, please don't hug me at work. Like that. No, thank you.
I would do the same thing.
I was like, no, thank you.
But no, you're so right. I think it is across just different levels of the spectrum and different forms of neurodivergence. I was going to say that even Adam has those moments, whether he realizes or not. And it took a really long time for me to understand it wasn't, a lack of care or empathy. It was just his brain is trying to solve a problem that I'm never even going to understand the light of day how he got there. But it's just how he operates. And it is something that, like Adam said, the stigma needs to be broken, and it needs to be kind of talked about and brought to light.
The way I do that in teams is, one of the things I constantly remind my team is you have to assume positive intent. At all times, assume positive intent.
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
Sometimes I no lie, sometimes it only lasts till 9 o'clock in the morning, and then I've thrown it out for the rest of the day. But I try to assume positive intent all day.
Yeah. It's harder to do these days with all the negative media and everything. But I do think that it's a valuable lesson for leaders, right? To assume a positive intent with their teams, within reason. But I do think that's a great leadership skill to have, because I think that ties into empathy. And I think, I've said on here a lot of times, I think that the two traits that make a leader some of the best leaders is empathy and curiosity. I think those are the two things that can really define a true leader. So I think you're touching on all those in just in a roundabout way in some senses, but I think what you're saying in a lot of ways describes that.
In a neurodivergent way. We'll put it that way.
There we go. Yeah. Tia will tell you it's not always a clear track of how we get there, but we get there.
The thing I would add to that,
learn to speak the language.
Yeah, the thing I would add that I've come to know, if you want to kind of put this in and think through it, is transparency.
Yeah.
Be as transparent as possible, and that includes telling your team, like, I know the answer, I can't tell you the answer. I'll be as transparent as I'm legally allowed to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's 100%. I mean, we talked about our process, right? And a lot of that is trying to get, how people think, how people process, how they put, the environments they work best in out before they get into an environment that is not suited for them. And I think lots of times that transparency in hiring processes, in business systems, gets lost because we're so focused on the outcome. We don't talk about the environment. We don't talk about the transparency of this. If you get into this role, this is what's going to be required, or this is what this means, or I think this way, you will never be successful in this environment, right? And I think we lose that in a lot of senses because we just try to, for lack of a better term, try to fit, square pegs around holes way too often.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
So, okay, let's do this. Let's do a little lightning round to wrap us up here.
Okay.
So, Conway, I laugh every time I do this because I put my guests through this on the podcast, and it's something I can never do, which is keep something to like one word or one sentence, which doesn't work in my world. But
do my best.
One word to describe. Yeah, I'm testing you. One word to describe how you think.
One word to describe how I think. How about two?
Okay, deal.
Root cause.
Oh, I love that one.
Yeah.
I take that way a lot. That's a great one. That's a great one. Tia's nodding her head like, yeah, I see that.
Yeah, check.
Fair. All right, one workplace norm that you'd redesign immediately.
Going to an office.
Okay, yeah, that's a fair one.
A lot of people are going to like that answer.
People can't work from wherever.
Yeah, so one...
No, oftentimes they work better.
Yeah, for sure. One thing
you would say that.
Yeah, there you go. One thing you'd remove from performance reviews.
Ooh. That's a tough one. One thing I'd remove from a performance review.
In the way that they're not the way you do it, but the way that they're standardized.
Yeah, I guess I would really say anything that's subjective.
Yeah.
Performance review should be an objective measurement of talent.
Yeah, that's a great one. All right, last one. One thing leaders overcomplicate about neuroinclusion.
Everything, actually.
Mic drop. That's the perfect answer.
It's not as hard as you think it is.
Yeah.
It's really, and you touched on it earlier, it's creating a space of psychological safety.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that people feel comfortable coming to work as they are. And you don't need to overcomplicate. It doesn't require corporate level change. It just requires, in some cases, better people leaders, or in some cases, just environments where people are comfortable being who they are.
Love it.
Yep.
That's a good one.
All right, I'm going to end us with my final question.
Sure.
What is one thing that's essential to who you are, especially in the workplace, that would never show up on your resume?
Oh, that would never show up on my resume? Wow, that's tough. This is going to sound odd, but it's my love of fiction. And the reason I said is so many of the norms I tried to model myself after when I was young and struggling with understanding why the world seemed so hard were fictional characters. So taking the best elements of an Aragorn the Ranger, Han Solo, Obi-Wan Kenobi, what are the best of those people? What makes them successul?
I thought it was going to tie something back to the Mandalorian. It's on the same page.
Yeah. But it is. It was. Yeah. I didn't have the words when I was younger, so the words I used because I was a big gamer. I feel like life is a role playing game, and I've just realized I've spec'd my character all wrong, and I can't go back and redo it like I can in a game.
Yeah, that's a great one, man.
It is if you game. People look at me like, what?
Well, gamers listen to this for sure. For sure. I appreciate you hopping on here, man.
Yeah,
I think this is a conversation that is so hard to do in 30, 35 minutes. We'll definitely have to, get you back on here to go more in depth at some point. But what I love about this conversation is it's so nonchalant and it's so kind of this, pardon the language, but just no shit, right? Like this isn't like you said, like don't overcomplicate this. It's not as weird as you think. It's not, and it's just normalizing that like we are all different. We all see things differently. We all show up to work differently. We all look at the world differently. Like it's why are we overcomplicating this? And I love your kind of straightforward way of doing things and putting things into perspective. And it's nothing about the way you operate your teams or show up in the workplace is complicated, but not enough people do it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Happy to do it again. Yeah, it is tough to do it in 35 minutes. Maybe not the best time format for neurodivergent people, but it's probably better.
No, that's why I do it. If I didn't set the time, I'd be on here for 4 hours and people would be like,
there'd be a lot of
why he brings me on. It's the only reason. Try to keep him on track.
That's why we have to have her in. She'll keep it on the rail.
Yeah, very important. I understand. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We'll do it again, and thanks everyone for listening, and we're looking forward to the next one.
All right, see you guys.
All right, cheers, everybody.